Wonderful. Great to see all of you joining us this morning. I see some familiar names. I see some new names, which is great. My name is Carly Rice, she, her pronouns. I'm the sustainability coordinator here on the Twin Cities campus, the University of Minnesota. And this is one of our sustainability coffee chats. So this is an event series that we've been running for a few years now to allow folks who are interested in sustainability related topics to come and learn something new and have some informal discussions in an approachable way. So if this is your first chat, thank you for joining us. This semester, we're very focused on climate topics. As you'll see today, we are talking about impacts of climate on Minnesota agriculture. We have three really wonderful speakers that I am excited to get into today. So I think we will go ahead and get started. I'm just making sure all of my speakers are logged on, and it looks like they are. Wonderful. All right. Wonderful. So today with us, we have Katie Black, who's an extension educator here at the U in climate adaptation and resilience. She will have a really unique perspective on this kind of from the climate side of things. And then we actually have two Minnesota farmers, Craig Laplante and Ian, and I'm not going to pronounce your last name correctly. Can you help me out?
Uh, sure. It's pronounced Schwagerl. It rhymes with bag.
Schwagerl. I love that. And Schwagerl. Wonderful. So three really wonderful speakers for us today with varying perspectives on this topic. So I think we'll just go in the order that we are seeing here on the screen, if that is all right with everyone. So kicking it off with Katie. So I will go ahead and stop my screen share. Speakers, you can take over screen share if you have any visuals you'd like to share. Um, and then after all of our speakers have had a chance to kind of introduce themselves and their work, we will go into some just informal questions and discussion. All right, so Katie, I'm handing it off to you.
Perfect. I am just pulling up my slides. Oops. And I will make it big. Okay. Carly, are we all good on your end? You can see my screen.
Yes, we are good to
Okay.
go.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you on this Friday morning. My name is Katie Black, and Carly gave me a great introduction. I am climate adaptation and resiliency educator. I'm part of a group at the U called the University of Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership. I'm relatively new in my role. I joined about a year ago today, so I've learned a lot along the way, and I'm excited about the plans that we have in place to advance climate smart agriculture across the state. I thought I could share a couple of slides about what I'm working on and kind of what we've seen about changes to our climate in the state and what we expect to happen to kind of center this conversation. So, with that, I think I will get into it. Like I said, we're a part of a group called the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership. We are a group that is rapidly growing, which is really exciting to be a part of. And we cover a lot of different topics within our group. But the pillars of what we do really come down to working with communities and community partners, increasing those communities and partners' capacity to do climate adaptation work through, teaching workshops or partnering on fact sheets or even bigger projects where we're conducting cutting edge research that will help inform decisions that need to be made by our partners and communities. And then lastly, we do we are at the forefront of our ability to um, inform people of what we expect to happen in Minnesota, by the mid-century, by the end of century, because we are constantly thinking about how we can communicate what's happening with global climate models, and translate that to what that means for our state specifically. Um, and again, just a little bit to give you a few more examples of what it is we do. Um, we have extension programs. I'm the agriculture person, but we have people focused on climate and health and climate and water, and climate and tribal communities. Again, we do a fair bit of work looking at the best ways to talk to people about these impacts that we expect to see happen across the landscape. We're talking to people about, things they might want to monitor for making progress on climate action. We do a fair bit of public engagement in the form of trainings and talks. Um, we are on both the applied and direct research side, in that some of our team goes to the Arctic to find the oldest ice on record to improve our climate models. And then a fair bit of our work is translating what those climate models are telling us and what those might mean for different areas, and different places across the state. So a lot of my job is telling people what we have already seen in terms of changes to Minnesota's climate. So I thought I might just start with that today. We know that in Minnesota, our climate has been getting warmer and wetter. Um, Over the last or excuse me, our 10 wettest and warmest years on record in Minnesota have all occurred after 1997. We always call out 2016 because that was the warmest and wettest year on record. We've seen an observed 13% increase in the heaviest rainfall of the year in the state. What does that actually mean? That means that our biggest storms are leading to 13% more precipitation than they previously would have. And we've seen that our growing season, which is the time between the last frost and first freeze, which is particularly important for thinking about growing plants and controlling pests that we don't like, has lengthened by about 2 weeks since the 1950s. And we have also seen, when I said that we've seen that the state has been getting warmer. I have a little bit of information here about how much warmer and where those temperatures were seeing the most significant impacts. So I have the state of Minnesota here. We have the average annual temperatures on the left, the winter lows in the middle, and the summer highs on the right. We're looking at temperature change across the state between the late 1800s until about now. And one thing that I just want to call out is that you'll notice that for each of these different categories, annuals, lows, and highs, these changes are not consistent across the state, which is why it's so important that we're working with communities to communicate what risks are most relevant to them. And the other thing that I want to point out is that we see climate change that so far has been impacting our northern portion of the state, and particularly winter, the most dramatically. That's where we've seen the most warming. So that has a lot of implications for a lot of different sectors, maybe less so for agriculture, but certainly more for people who are passionate about making sure that we still have, good recreation opportunities and tourism opportunities in the state with our winters. And another thing we've seen is that transitions from wet to dry extremes are happening more quickly and more frequently. So I think the past couple of years are a really great example of that. In 2021, 2022, and 2023, we had drought. And then on the flip side of that, this summer has been extremely wet And we also see this fall has been reverting back to drought. And we expect that these transitions will continue to occur in the future. So it'll be about kind of managing extremes as we move forward. Again, so in the future, we expect that these trends will continue. Minnesota will continue to get warmer. We'll continue to get wetter on average. We actually expect that things will be drier than what we are historically used to in the summer. And again, we'll just see more of those extremes that I was talking about. So what does that mean for agriculture, right? So if we're talking about warmer summers, obviously, impacts to plants and their ability to weather very high temperatures is a concern. We see that plants tend to decline if they're subject to a long stretch of very high temperatures, depending on the crop. When I say wetter, if we have wet springs but dry summers, that means that farmers have to navigate challenges related to nutrient management, dealing with runoff, and not being able to get in the fields when they want to, but also, in summers having to deal with droughts, which obviously has a lot of implications for yields. And then again, it's just a question of how can you build resiliency on your farm so that you are prepared to manage, a wide range of challenges in a single growing season, which has a lot of implications for finances and farmer mental health, in addition to a lot of just agronomic challenges. How do you make decisions when you're dealing with both of those extremes? So again, a lot of what I am trying to do in my role is communicate what climate change specifically means for the state of Minnesota, and B, what those changes mean for different aspects of agricultural production. So we have this neat tool that you can access if you go to our webpage, climate.umn.edu. We have this tool called MinClimate. And basically, what it allows you to do is look at climate projections for a wide variety of regions across the state, across a wide variety of variables relating to temperature, precipitation, humidity, lakes over different time frames. Under different timelines and different emissions scenarios, because we know that the intensity of climate impacts will change based on how we as a society choose to act, in our ability to continue exacerbating or reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So it accounts for futures in which we are able to move to a low emissions world and varying degrees of high emissions worlds. And again, this tool, I can't get into it with only 10 minutes, but I encourage you to explore it because we have a lot of different variables in there related to future climate, and different, things that are most relevant for different sectors across the state. Um, for a little bit more about what it is that I plan to do with that data and figuring out what those projected impacts mean for agriculture. A lot of what I'm doing is trying to work with farmers on creating some cohorts where we can create plans for how we might respond to these changes, because we know that it's really hard to deal with a crisis or really extreme conditions when you're in the middle of it, in the middle of a growing season that's really dry or really wet. But if you, in a winter season, have time to come up with strategies for what you might do to respond to those conditions, that may set you up better and build overall resilience to your operation. We have worked with partners to do some farm assessments to see what people are doing for resiliency strategies across the state, across different types of farms. We are partnering with different extension organizations across the country who have climates similar to what we might experience in the future, and figuring out what strategies that they have currently adopted that might make sense for us to start implementing here based on future climate. And we're constantly thinking again about the communications piece, and we know that having conversations with farmers about climate change can be really challenging. So we are working with partners to figure out how we can kind of guide people through those conversations. And then lastly, our tool that we plan to launch this winter, again, there's a lot of, you have to keep track of a lot of different pieces when thinking about what future climate means for your operation and how you plan for that. So what we're really hoping to do is kind of simplify that process and create an online tool where people can observe what climate risks are most pertinent to them in a given season and strategies for building resilience and capacity to respond to those conditions. Um, and some of these conditions we have strategies to, dealing with increased risk of pests or shifts from wet to dry. But some of them are challenging. How do you manage future road restrictions? How do you respond to pests that we aren't totally sure if they'll increase in frequency or increase in range? So we are also trying to better understand where knowledge gaps lie across agricultural preparedness in the state, and trying our best to help answer some of those questions. So that was everything I had for my slides, and I'm excited to hear from our farmers so that they can add kind of their own experiences with dealing with these conditions.
Katie, thank you. That was a great way to kick us off and ground this conversation. I will turn it over to Craig, and then if we can take all of our questions at the end, that would be fantastic. So if you have burning questions for Katie, just hold on to those. So Craig, whenever you are ready.
All right, can you hear me?
I
All
can,
right,
yes.
so all right, I farm up here at Crookston, Minnesota. I'm 4 miles straight west of the University of Minnesota Crookston campus. And there's a very large variance in soil type, structure, and drainage patterns from just in 4 miles. I'm a heavy clay based soil, whereas the university is a silt loam soil. So in my pocket, I've been in a pocket here that's about a mile and a half wide by 3 miles long, where we've been in an extreme drought for the past 11 years, where we've recorded less than 2 inches of rainfall per year. And it's in a very small pocket. But then this year we came in and we've had 33 inches of rainfall in 6 months. So when you're talking extremes, you can't get much farther extreme than that. So I've raised a lot of crops on just receiving and capturing snow. So I harvest snow and raise crop on that because we don't get rainfall. And then I've gone in where we've just raised a crop on strictly just dew that we've had at night as well too. So to have a year where we go from farming in like the golden wheat triangle of Montana to now we're farming in rice country basically with the rainfall. It poses a lot of problems in farming situations, but it also offers a lot of opportunities to change farming situations. So in my operation, I'm doing a lot of no-till, removing the tillage. And by removing the tillage, you increase water holding capacity through no tillage. And I've implemented a lot of cover crop into these situations. And I use multi-species cover crop instead of monoculture cover crops as well too. So, and what I found by doing so in the different species of cover crops, I've actually captured a lot of moisture during those extreme drought years because the architecture, plant architecture will grab moisture at different levels and then it funnels it down, and then that ground being covered will capture that moisture and bring it into very low deposits into the field so we can recharge our subsoils, whereas a monoculture crop growing won't do that at all. You don't have any variance, so you don't capture rainfall, you don't capture humidity. So the next step is to integrate livestock into that operation as well so that we can rebuild our soil microbiomes as well too, with the funguses and the bacteria. The majority of our soils around here are basically 4 bacterial types, and we've eliminated a lot of those other ones just through high applications of synthetic fertilizers and other chemistries. So our soils have lost their ability to have the necessary glues to prevent them from wind erosion and to support other functional species that help hold down on soil pathogens that would attack things as well too, because we have no diversity in our soils. So some of the stuff I've done on my farm is I've gone through and I've DNA soil tested all of my farm. So I know what I have for pathogens that are out there. So I know if I need to use seed treatments or not, or insecticides. In majority of the time, I don't have to. They don't pose any benefit to me. They're just an economic outlay. And these DNA soil tests are relatively inexpensive, and more farms should be using them. And then I've done a lot of just nutrient sampling besides and gone way beyond the standard NPK soil tests that the average farmer uses. I'm several steps beyond that. One of the things that's also come about is this year I became a Minnesota Agriculture Water Quality Certified Farm because of my no-till operations, my implementation of cover crops, the reduction in tillage, and a varied crop rotation as well too. So I've got a long library of photos that I can't show you here, but I'll be presenting down at the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition, presenting information there in Mankato in December as well too. But I've hosted several different on-farm demonstration days, and we just had one here in July on the farm. That we, due to being so wet, we had to actually have it on the University of Minnesota campus. But we had a great turnout of about 200 people of area farmers and ag sales, equipment sales, and biological sales companies that were in attendance as well too. But then we had Ray Archuleta was the premier speaker for the day as well too. So we keep holding and mentoring programs like that and encourage the FFA, 4-H, and mentorship programs to come out to the farm and see what I'm doing here versus the conventional ag production systems. I've implemented several monitoring systems on the farm as well, so I can monitor CO2 levels as my crop is growing out in the field and what my soil retention of moistures are, soil temperatures are doing, several other environmental conditions through some of the monitoring systems I've bought and implement on the farm. So that's kind of the short and sweet of it, but economics due to weather patterns have changed how I have to operate this farm. And I keep a varied toolbox of implements in the yard so that I can stay mobile and implement these as things deem that I need to do.
Craig, thank you. I am fascinated by what you're doing. What you're doing up there. The snow bit really just took me by surprise. That is so innovative and unfortunate that that's the direction you've had to go. But like I said, I'll save my own questions for Craig till the end. So we will then hand it over to Anne, our final speaker, and then, like I said, we'll get into some discussion and some questions.
Hi there, can you see my slides? of course, it goes on to my other screen, so it's hard to, I don't want to.
I can, yes.
Okay. Um,
Oh, they may have just disappeared out
oh,
on me.
shoot. Okay, hold on.
They were there.
Okay. Are they back?
They are back.
Great. Okay. Well, you're going to see me looking to the side to the side
That's just fine.
okay. So, I think I'm going to be a little bit of a broken record here this morning. But my name's Ann Schwagerl. I'm a farmer in Big Stone County. That for folks who are not familiar with the geography of Minnesota, if you're thinking of the western border of Minnesota as a straight line from Crookston all the way down, relatively, the Red River is a little waggly. And then a bump in the middle, and then another straight line. I am in the tip of the bump. Big Stone County is along the border with South Dakota. This is a picture of me with my father-in-law on Who Wore It Better Day. I'm actually really glad I'm not wearing those overalls this morning. That was a choice I hadn't thought through before I was sitting down this morning. Our family farm, my husband and I farm together with my father-in-law, Jerry. And we've been growing corn, soybeans, small grains that would be like oats and barley and wheat and winter camelina. My husband and I have been farming since 2012. Jerry is a generational farmer. We are all generational farmers. And as a family, we operate about 820 acres of certified organic grain near Beardsley. I work off farm. I have the privilege of serving as the vice president of Minnesota Farmers Union, which is a general farm organization. It's a grassroots member-based organization, been around for over 100 years. So I get to represent farmers all across the state of Minnesota and nationally and sometimes internationally when I'm really lucky. And so on our farm, we've been really trying to kind of wrestle with this puzzle of organic and regenerative ag. Our farm's been certified organic since 2017, fully organic since 2021. But we're seeing a lot, like Katie and both Craig said, heavy spring rains on bare ground. Because it's organic, we have to do a fair bit of tillage to control weeds. And that, we're seeing the effects of those heavy rains on bare soil. And of course, wanting to cover our fields in the winter a lot more too. So we've had to get pretty creative in the organic system for what we can do. And now we're, playing around with what can we do in the conventional system because we have some parallel production, which means that we're doing some conventional acres and some organic acres at the same time. What tools can we use in the toolbox to kind of build resiliency? My theme today will be all about building resiliency. These pictures are all from my farm, I believe from 2019, those pictures. Katie mentioned it, over the last 5 growing season, 2019 for us was historically wet. We average about 20 inches more or less of rain every year. We had about 32 in 2019 on our farm. 2020 through 2023, we had late wet springs that whiplashed us into drought summers. 21 was a historically dry year for us, a 30-year drought. And then 24 this year, we had what was a dry winter. We thought that we'd be able to get in and get farming right away on our fields, became historically wet, and now we're back to drought conditions on our farm. And if I could take you all out with me and show you the big cracks in the field where the ground has dried out again. We haven't had a measurable rain on our farm since August 16th. We had 0.4 of an inch on August 16th, and we've had nothing for the last 8 weeks. On our operation, and it's stressing it for several reasons. So we've, you do the definition of insanity is doing something the same way over and over and expecting a different result. We've kind of decided that something's got to give on the farm. How are we going to build a both economically and environmentally resilient farm into the future? As generational farmers, we think a lot about like who will be farming this land in the future. We have 2 young kids. Hopefully one of them or a family member would be interested in farming this land, and we want to leave it in good condition for the next generation of farmers. Our kind of key challenges being, keeping moisture moving and keeping the soil covered to retain nutrients and moisture during these dry times. Retain nutrients during wet times, and retain moisture during dry times. How do we provide the soil with the armor that it needs to kind of stay protected and stay resilient? Back in 2019, at that point, we were started investigating kind of the work coming out of the University of Minnesota's Forever Green initiative. Their goal is to develop and improve winter hardy annual and perennial crops that protect the soil while creating new economic opportunities for growers, industry, and communities across Minnesota. It's a real sea change for me, at least as I think about it as a producer. It's nice to plant cover crops. We've been cover cropping on the farm since 2014, with help from the USDA's EQIP program, which cost shares for farmers. But to have something to sell at the end of the day after you've cover cropped is totally different. EQIP won't let you sell something that you have. If you're getting cost share, they assume that you are not taking that for grain or for sale. And it's totally different for me to think about having something to sell at the end. So U of M Forever Green Initiative has a wide range of crops that are woody forages, perennial, woody crops, perennials, forages, winter annuals, across a pretty big variety of things. We have played around, and I'll show you slides from both Kernza and winter camelina. Those are the two that are kind of, for grain farmers at least, closest to being commercialized. In August of 2020, we planted our first Kernza crop. For folks who are unfamiliar with Kernza, it's the world's first perennial grain crop. That means you plant it once and you don't disturb the soil again until you terminate it. And that can be for 3 to 4 years, depending on kind of your stand and your coverage that you're looking for. The roots go down 10 feet into the ground. I have a picture here. On the left, you'll see kind of a slice out of it. Relative to wheat, which Kernza is like a cousin of, kind of behaves similarly. Wheat's roots only go down 3 or 4 inches into the soil. Kernza can really hold that in the soil. And, when we had those late wet springs, our nearby fields, our corn, our soybean fields, we had drown out issues. We had crusting issues on the ground. The Kernza field, because it had that cover and then those really deep roots, was able to absorb the moisture that it had and let it kind of it soaked up a lot of moisture, and then it produced a lot of biomass kind of covering that soil on top. The market for Kernza is very, very early, and the seed, I think, still has some work at the University of Minnesota to improve the agronomics of it. But it's something certainly that we are keeping an eye on into the future. We've rotated it out of our rotation. The market is relatively small for it. It's not quite at that commodity production level yet, which is fine. Certainly something that we're keeping our eyes on in the future. But then, because we like to keep our neighbors chatting about us in the coffee shop, we decided to try a different crop. In September of 2021, we planted winter camelina for the first time. This was in partnership between the University of Minnesota and MBOLD, which is a coalition of Minnesota agribusiness leaders, and to kind of launch these crops. It was a 12-acre, very, very small field of winter camelina, and that one shows a lot of promise from a market perspective. We love the way that it covered the soil. We love the pollinator benefits of it. It's it's very competitive. It keeps very clean fields, outcompetes weeds, which is a challenge on our organic farm. We were very pleased with the way that it behaved. So this last fall, because the fall of 22, where it was extremely dry. So we did not we did not plant any, but the fall of 23, and then again this fall, we participated in a pilot program to launch sustainable aviation fuel grown from winter camelina, and then partnered with the folks at Cargill, who were the buyers. They were offering contracts to grow it, which is, as a farmer, and we're talking about maintaining kind of economic resilience too. That's something that is really 75, excuse me. That winter camelina went up to the West Fargo crush plant. So they nice folks at Cargill have a crush plant for canola, generally in West Fargo, North Dakota. And they crushed it. They sent it off to Montana Renewables to refine it. And then in September, or excuse me, earlier this month, no, it was September, sorry. Delta Airlines took off with their first sustainable aviation fueled flight from Minneapolis to LaGuardia in New York, which was really exciting because it was grown by farmers in western Minnesota and southern Minnesota and a little bit in North Dakota, and then is fueling airplanes. The airline industry is, of course, a really tough to decarbonize industry. I don't think anyone is interested in battery operated planes. And from what we hear in the agricultural community, that's decades into the future before that technology will be ready to go. So, how do we move away from jet fueled, fossil fuel based fuels for airline industry? And this provides that kind of win-win, right? It's an economic opportunity for producers. It's, we're keeping our soils covered in the fall, winter, and spring when our soils are really vulnerable to wind and water erosion. And we're decarbonizing the airline industry. So that was really exciting. After we get off this call, I'm going to go out and finish planting winter camelina actually today. Certified. And then this year, 2023-24, Peter and I were awarded a soil health financial assistance grant from the state of Minnesota. It's a competitive grant program, first in the nation, that will help farmers purchase soil health equipment. So for us, that was a no-till drill. So then we don't have to do tillage to get the soil prepared to plant cover crops or small grains, have a little bit more diverse of a cropping system. This was actually last Saturday. Senator Klobuchar was out at our farm taking a look at it and talking about sustainable aviation fuel because we use that to plant the camelina. This is our dog. And my husband checking some cover cropped fields where that camelina was. It's got a diverse blend of cover crops on it. And I think that is my time. So I can stop sharing. And if there are questions, I'm happy to take some questions.
And thank you so much. I'm just so fascinated by all of this. But I will stop talking and allow our audience to ask some questions of our speakers. Or I can kick us off if folks are feeling a little shy this morning. So this question I think would be more for Anne and for Craig, but potentially for Katie as well. What is something that you wish other farmers in Minnesota knew? As it sounds like Anne and Craig, you guys are doing some things that are very innovative, and you're really pivoting to get that resiliency on your farms. And I can imagine that there are farms that are maybe struggling even more or failing because of these climate impacts. I guess what is one thing that you would share with other farmers in Minnesota?
I think,
Well, it was,
oh, go
what
ahead.
more producers need to do is take a look at their overall soil health and their soil structure and pull samples because up here in Crookston area with the sugar beet and the edible bean rotations that we have, our soil organic matters at one time were as high on these prairie soils as almost 10% organic matter. And under extreme tillage and heavy tillage, we've dropped a lot of those down to only 2.6, 2.8% organic matter. And so we have no water infiltration. So when we have these big rain events, very little of that soil is capturing that water and it's running off and it hits our rivers and then causes extreme flooding up here in this extremely flat land. So if they would go through and start analyzing and doing water infiltration rate studies, which are very easily done, and your local SWCD offices have that equipment to be doing that and demonstrating it, so that you can see that the tillage is being extremely harmful to those soils in many different aspects. And then start implementing some of these other soil testing programs that are available. Start using the DNA soil testing, start using nutrient density testing. There's a lot of other programs that are available, but the farmers have got to start looking at going and attending some of these sessions instead of just relying on their consultant that they've got hired to walk their farm. They got to start looking and reaching outside of the box again. Too many of them have come saying, "Well, that's why I got a consultant hired is to take care of that for me." And the consultant is busy with 100 other farms at the same time, and sometimes they're not up to date on what's going on as well either.
I mean, I would say kind of similarly, Craig, I liked your point about, do I really need seed treatments? Do I really need another pass of herbicide? Um, I think it's this idea of building resiliency economically by not necessarily thinking about chasing yield as the ultimate end all be all for success, but thinking about return on investment. Certainly, we've seen side by side the difference in that first camelina field that we planted in 21. Right next to it was a soybean field. We had a 3.5 inch rain on May 31st before those soybeans had emerged. Camelina was already up. It was flowering. It was beautiful. And it they crusted over that bare soil, right? That soybean soil. It was lumpy. It was really hard to deal with that bare soil for the rest of the year. Um, and the soybean suffered as a result. The camelina popped right. I mean, it does not like being too wet for too long, but it did pop right back up. It weathered that, it managed it. We moved on with the year. The following year, where we had that soybean ground, all of it went into both the camelina and the soybean ground went into corn production. The ground that had been covered with the camelina, and then following that, a cover crop for the year, had that armor on it next year. Side by side with the corn, all of it was in corn. The corn on that covered ground performed 20% better than the corn that was on that bare soybean ground. We pay for those sins of having bare soil for years. And we're still dealing with that on that ground. So seeing kind of that side by side comparison of, yeah, we certainly didn't make as much money on that soybean year because we had 12 acres that were in camelina, right? But the next year and the following year, we have a higher return on investment because we keep that soil covered on those acres.
Yeah, I think I would just echo what both Anne and Craig were saying in that um, my dad is a farmer, rightfully so, farmers are very hesitant to make changes because of the return on investment and because there's a lot of risk involved in making big changes. Especially I think among older generations of farmers, there's a real hesitance to try new things because of what they have experienced in the past with policy. But I I think I there's sometimes overlooked that, the practices that Anne and Craig are both doing don't improve your situation overnight. Like it takes many years to
Mhm.
build soil health, to build resiliency in your cropping systems. And so it makes a lot of sense, even if you don't see the return on investment right the year that you implement them, you will likely see those gains in future years. And if you wait too long to, I guess, what we're projecting to see in the future, I worry that people will think that these things don't work when really they just haven't given them enough time.
I would also say that, my banker would not have financed a full new no-till drill. But because there's a program at the state of Minnesota, like the Soil Health Financial Assistance Grant Program, um, that lowers that. I mean, that's 50% equity in the form of a grant from the state, right? So that return on investment issue is relatively low, right? Because a no-till drill doesn't necessarily earn us the same money as if we had invested that same amount on a new corn planter, right? So I think having programs like that help lower that barrier to entry for soil health practices for farmers.
What other questions do folks have?
Something that I've noticed on my farm is where I've implemented like a stripper header for combining the small grains. So we're leaving that stubble there. So in order to implement that kind of a system, I've also had to change my row spacing. Where I used to be 7.5 inch, I'm now out to 15-inch wide rows on small grains, so that we can get the sunlight and the air in on these heavy clay soils in the spring to dry them up so we can still plant. But the big thing that has changed from doing a stripper system is we get a complete blanket, an insulating blanket of snow that can be 2.5, 3 feet deep versus these hard wind driven snow drifts. And then you got open areas of the field, and the frost goes very, very deep in those systems versus in a snow blanket. The other thing that helps do then is for township road maintenance in winter times. We don't have the big snow drifts and the roads aren't plugged. And then I'm a little over a mile from Highway 2 up here that runs east and west, and it's one of the most dangerous roads in the wintertime due to our rapidly hitting blizzards that'll hit up here as well. And when we can trap the snow back off of a major US highway a mile back, it greatly reduces the amount of tax dollars it takes to maintain these roads in the wintertime. So we see a big change there. So if more people would implement these programs, and some of that is I've been working on changing some of the equip programs where we're looking at the grain storage loan facility programs where you can buy trucks, skid steers, all that, but combine headers aren't one of the pieces of equipment, and that's one of the major changes that needs to be done. Or I've worked on several different times with federal crop insurance agencies where we can put in a polycrop like oats and peas, or oats and flax, or oats and some of these. Because when you start doing a polycrop system, the different crops start to synchronize with each other for harvestability as well too. But when you start doing a polycrop, you actually start to mitigate issues of disease and insects. it kind of confuses them because those plants are giving off different hormones and pheromones and everything else, and it disrupts what they find in a monoculture system as well too. And you make a lot better use of limited rainfall or very heavy rainfalls because these plants are able to brace against each other instead of lodging as well too, because they've got different structure to them and they brace each other and hold each other up. So again, it makes harvest easier. That's several different things that I've noticed that um, so it's benefit to both to the producer but also to the taxpayer as well too.
Thanks, Craig. Katie, I'm wondering from your perspective, what are some of the trends that you are predicting for the next, let's say, 5 years to a decade in ag here in Minnesota? Maybe what are some of the things that you're excited about? Maybe let's end this session on a little bit of a hopeful note. Kind of where do you see things going? What sort of resources will become available for our farmers?
Yeah, I think, and I would like for Anne and Craig to weigh in too. But I think to what Anne said, that we are living in a period where there is maybe more funding for these soil health opportunities and climate resilient practices than there have ever been available to farmers previously. So I think that, people are really trying to address those barriers through grant funding and the creation of new markets. I think one thing that is challenging to living through climate change and thinking about the future is that you are trying to build the car while you're driving it, so to speak. But if you think about, Kernza, especially in the last couple of years, a few years ago, people had no idea what Kernza was, and now you can buy it at your co-op or a specialty market, and it's likely that you won't have to go to a specialty store to get those products in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think that the pace at which we are making advancements is what gives me hope. And Anne's group, the farmers that she works with are all totally open about talking about climate change and have taken it upon themselves as a priority to advocate for. So those are things that also I think are giving me hope and energy and thinking about what the future might look like. People recognizing that this is a problem and that we have to change, and I think that there are policy and social cues indicating that change will be slow, but that we are actually have been making progress in the last couple of years, especially.
Anne or Craig, any follow-up on that? What is anything hopeful that you're seeing or predicting?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
go ahead, Ann.
I would say when I first started working with Minnesota Farmers Union in an advocacy kind of role, participating in both like fly-in and into Washington D.C. and then advocating in St. Paul as well. Uh, Climate change was kind of a dirty. I mean, we were still in the middle of the GMO wars, right? We were fighting different fights and now like both legislators, Congress, members of Congress, and then there are like major philanthropic organizations really want to talk about ag's role in climate change. And and our role then as advocates for farmers is to talk about how farmers are at this really interesting intersection with climate change, as being both victims of climate change and also the potential to be a part of the solution. And that's a role that ag hasn't been at for a long time. A lot of times agriculture was being blamed for climate change, and we are contributors to greenhouse gas emissions for sure. Um, I think the change that's happening now and the mind shift that's happening in agriculture, especially among farmers, is what are we doing to be a part of the solution? And that is really exciting to me.
I'd just like to add in there, there's a couple really good documentaries that you can pull up on YouTube, and two of them are in a three-part series, and one of them is called Kiss the Ground, the other one is Common Ground, and the third one is being filmed right now as we speak. And these are people that are on the very forefront. They've been in there that have been no-tillers and cover croppers for over 50 years in their operations all across the United States. And these guys have also started and formed a business company called Understanding Ag as well too. So they go around the world and they are consultants to help people implement regenerative ag processes. And they've been across several millions of acres in all types of climates, from the tundra basically to the Sahara Desert, and they're regenerating those types of growing systems. And these processes work everywhere. And the old adage, well, it's too cold here, I can't make that work, falls apart completely. It's just your willingness to adapt and try these things. Yeah, is there nuances to it? Absolutely there is. But it's a process that works and it's been proven. But those two documentaries are fantastic. I highly, highly, highly recommend them. And then there's a few people that really clue in and watch some of their YouTube videos is Dr. Christine Jones. And another one is the Johnson Sioux bioreactors. They're from the University of Southern California, where they're doing compost bioreactors that are extremely easy to make off of your own compost materials, off of your own farm or off of your own household in town, and then use that material to rehab your own soils or your front lawns. Or take your front lawns and start interplanting clovers and trefoils and other thing into your front lawn. Nowhere in nature do we have perfectly manicured lawns. And perfectly manicured lawn is not environmentally healthy either. There's no diversity, so you can't support other life.
Craig, I'm going to need you to call up my dad and let him know that his perfectly manicured lawn could be switched to clover. I've been trying, but no luck. Such a
Actually,
cultural thing. So interesting.
yep, it is.
Oh goodness. Well, we are at 10:30. These tend to just fly right by. I want to say a massive thank you to our speakers. Um, especially our farmers. I know you guys are probably on crazy schedules. Thank you for taking time out to do this. That is fantastic. Katie, also, we're so glad that you're here. And very, very quickly, I just wanted to share my final slide here. We do have one more coffee chat coming up this semester. So this was our third one here today, and then we are finishing off with a chat on food security. So obviously very related to agriculture. So if that is something of interest, maybe will see you coming up on November 7th. Thank you to Hannah for putting the link in the chat. So if you're interested, feel free to register for that one. These will all be recorded and available on our website as well. So again, huge thank you to our speakers, and hopefully we will see some of you on November 7th. Thanks all.